Lyra watched impassively as the battle unfolded from a distance. She was dressed in simple garb, brown pants, brown shirt, and a black cloak draped around her shoulders. To anyone who saw her, she looked much like a commoner. The only thing to give away that she was a mage was the dim blue mana glow of her eyes. The wind blew her braided ponytail and caused her cloak to sway. It also blew the smell of blood and death to her. The war had been going terribly for the Carry. The dwarven conglomerate had decided to annex the Carry homeland for its natural resources. They invaded in a tidal wave of armoured soldiers and clockwork contraptions. The Carry were simple hunter-gatherers, with only hunting spears to their name. While they were excellent with them and could hit weak spots in armour with ease, the unfortunate truth was the dwarven conglomerate had the most powerful standing army across the realm. The Carry knew they could not fight, and so they abandoned their homes and sought refuge in a distant land. They had come here seeking a new place to settle and rebuild, but right on their tails came the dwarves. It seemed the conglomerate was intent on taking their lives as well as their lands. Lyra's eyes narrowed as that thought entered her mind. Normally she would not involve herself in the conflicts of others, but she was not about to stand idle while the genocide of an entire race took place on her doorstep. Closing her eyes, she focused and reached out towards the battle with her mind. Once she found the combatants, she did a quick count. Roughly 5,000 dwarven troops, and just a little over 1,300 total Carry left. The bulk of the Carry were fleeing, while only a few remained near the dwarves. Likely the warriors had decided on a final stand, hoping to buy time for the rest to escape. Time for her to step in. She picked a spot just behind the Carry warrior line before beginning to weave and focus the spell. Narel's remaining ear was pressed flat to his head, his teeth bared in a snarl. The blood oozing from the stump of his severed ear had run down and blinded one eye, but he had no time to clear it. The dwarves were advancing past the bodies of many of his warrior brothers. He knew he would die here. His only hope was that he and his fellow warriors could hold the dwarves long enough for the rest of their people to escape. He was just about to shout for a final charge at the dwarven line when a thunderclap erupted behind him, causing him to start. He turned to see what had happened, and froze. Despair clutched at his heart, and saw that a mage had teleported behind their line. Not just a mage, a human mage. Was this an ambush? Narelle was about to charge the human when it spoke. Get back. An elder might know the human language, but not him. Before he could think further on it, however, the mage began walking towards their defensive line. Her eyes burned with barely contained rage, but they were not looking at Narelle or any of the Carry warriors that remained. No, the fury in those eyes was aimed squarely at the leading edge of the dwarven advance. He quickly growled out a retreat order. The Carry warriors around him wasted no time in obeying. Even their simple tribe had heard tales of the terrible spells human mages could weave, and none of them wanted to be there for it. Narelle's curiosity got the best of him, however. Once he was a fair distance away, he stopped and quickly cleared his eye of blood. The rest of the Carry had continued on, no doubt desperate to get away before the mage began. By the time he had turned around, he saw the human mage standing with a scant 100 spear lengths between her and the dwarven army. The human reached up to her neck and her cloak dropped to the ground behind her. She spread her arms skywards, and Narelle heard her speak the magic, and watched as the terrible spell unfolded. Daylight in bad dreams. Light flashed from the dwarven ranks and the screaming began. Some collapsed while others held their head. Many began trying to claw their eyes out, trying to stop whatever the spell had done to them. In a cool world, full of cruel things. Even with his fur, Narelle felt the temperature around them drop substantially. Clouds spontaneously formed above the battlefield. A torrent of snow began to fall and then suddenly stopped, though Narelle didn't even have time to wonder why before the answer began hurtling downward. Massive shards of ice, nearly the size of a carry warrior, fell on the battlefield. The jagged and sharp shards impelled many dwarves, but it seemed they were not concentrated and instead intentionally spread out amongst the dwarven ranks. "Hang tight, all you!" Arcane chains erupted from the ice shards embedded in the ground. The chains rapidly extended to attach to other nearby ice shards, impaling everything dwarf along the way. Narelle could barely believe it. Relief welled up within him as he exhaustedly fell to his knees. This mage had single-handedly destroyed an entire dwarven detachment. His people would survive after all. He had just started to think about how to thank the mage when he heard the final words of the terrible spell the mage had been casting. Nothing like a big bad bridge to go burning through. A massive portal matrix grew underneath where the dwarven army lay. Then Narelle heard and felt a great crackling crunch. The terrible sound reverberated through his body and mind. It was as if reality itself was crumbling at the sheer scale of the portal that was opening. Uncountable screams of agony and terror filled the air as the dwarven army was swallowed by hell itself. The portal remained open only for a few seconds, but sights, sounds, and smells of it would remain with him for the rest of his life. He shivered, looked at the savior of his people, not with hope or thanks, but with dread and terror. His remaining ear had flattened back against his head as he began to doubt her intentions after all. His heart nearly stopped when she turned to stare directly at him. Her eyes met his, but instead of the rage he had seen earlier, he only saw weariness and pity in them. She turned away after a moment and bent down to retrieve her cloak. As soon as her hand touched it, she and the cloak disappeared in another thunderclap. Slowly, Narelle rose to his feet, shaking. Where the dwarven army had stood, now there was little more than a scar of blackened and charred dirt. He picked up his spear and began making his way in the direction the others had fled. He had quite the story to tell them once he caught up.